Hi, Adam. Thank you. I don't think we've really had an opportunity to meet, and I want to say this presentation in particular, the level of clarity with such a massive agency, I'm just incredibly impressed and appreciative, and also appreciative of a ton of complicated balancing that you're trying to do. So here's kind of my question. I had a group of volunteers analyze this budget. One of them walked through and did a comparison with the funding levels that would be needed for us to achieve the Denver Moves Everything plan, which is a wonderful plan. And the gaps are pretty stunning. So for sidewalks, according to the plan, we would need about 160 million next year. We will have 20 in this budget and maybe another 30 or 40 when the sidewalk initiative funding starts coming in. Bike infrastructure, to achieve Denver Moves, we would need 30 million. This budget gives 3.3, which is a reduction from last year, a $27 million gap. Transit, we would need 170 million to meet the plan. This budget is 20. Signals, 190 million needed, 8 million funded. Multimodal transit, 40 million needed, 2.9 million funded. So I don't have a money wand. It's now very personal between me and Douglas Bruce, I would say. But you know, one of my very passionate volunteers wrote that this budget is a death toll for Denver Moves Everyone. My question in that light is actually more for the mayor, and it has to do with National Western. My question is why? Tens of millions of dollars to that complex, which has a lot of private and other funding sources, which I love. I have family that has participated in the stock show. I'm from Wyoming for, you know, decades, I would say. I go there every year with my kids. But, you know, putting the emotions aside, I don't understand why National Western is being given that level of prioritization, especially given that voters voted down a bond package for it, which is pretty unprecedented a few years ago. So that is my question. When we have those funding gaps for these incredibly important priorities for our really strong plan, why we're funding the stock show. I also would be interested to know a little bit more from Adam about what the structure is within DOTI for capturing and pursuing those state and federal grant funds. I noted the slide about all the matching grants. It's more of a structural question. I'm curious who within DOTI does that, how you make sure that you're never letting any funding opportunities slip, and how you work with RTD and CDOT on that.
Yeah, certainly. So happy to kind of walk through the grant process, and it depends on where that grant opportunity could be. So for a federal grant, we partner with the Department of Finance. There's a federal grant team in DOF where we flag that. One item that you'll see a line item budget for here is the IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Program Management Services. So we do have funded this year and continue to fund next year a program management function that allows us to keep our fingers on the pulse of the entirety of federal funding opportunities as it relates to sustainability and green infrastructure, as it relates to electrification of our network, as it relates to wastewater. This is how we identified the water project that we have within the South Platte. We meet that, and that meets on a monthly basis, organized by the mayor's office. Chief Projects Officer Josh Lately leads that, and DOTI staffs and supports it. So that's where we capture federal opportunities. For state and local opportunities, Nick Williams, Deputy Manager and Chief of Staff for DOTI, sits on Dr. COG, which is a regional funding body that has a good line of sight into those opportunities. Our Transit Director, David Krutzinger, is tied into those opportunities more focused around rail that may come from RTD or state opportunities there. And then we also have a grant review body led by our Transportation and Mobility Planning Director, Jen Hillhouse, where we're just simply leveraging the expertise, the networks of DOTI staff to source those throughout, and then we meet on a monthly basis to make sure that we have an aligned and intentional plan around what is worth pursuing. Is the grant funding come with requirements that would make the cost of implementation greater than if we didn't accept the grant, or is this a value add to us as a city? And so we could provide some of the kind of process decision making that we use for that, Councilwoman, but we do have a very robust effort in a couple different areas to address that.
That's wonderful, and I'm excited to hear about that project management body. So another question, would it be worth funding more staffing for parking lot enforcement? Would that bring in potentially more revenue than the cost of the staffing?
You know, I think potentially. What I would say is I'd like to first focus on how do we ensure that we get to a point with right-of-way enforcement that our filled position rate is better aligned with the department. It's just, and this has been historic for certainly my entire tenure at DOTI, that it's a very difficult position to fill. It can be a position that takes a lot of abuse. It can be a position that is physically demanding. And so I think I'd say let's focus on that first. If we get to a point where we're well staffed there, that would be another item that we would look to the Department of Finance and say, hey, we think that there's an opportunity to increase safety within our right-of-way with greater enforcement. These positions also drive revenue. Is this something that we could propose to council as a mid-year supplemental?
Okay, and last question for me. I am a fan of electric vehicles. I own and drive one, and I think electrifying fleets is a crucial thing to do. I also hesitate a little bit when it comes to either fleet electrification or incentivizing electric vehicles among consumers, whether that's really getting us sort of the degree of climate bang for our buck compared to more basic things like bike lanes and multimodal. So that's more of a general comment, but I would love to know that the agency has kind of thought that through.
Yeah, we certainly love infrastructure as well. And so we don't dedicate any of DOTI's dollars for any type of incentive to for electrification of private vehicles. We certainly look at the ability to it's like a tongue twister. We look at the ability to leverage the technology with DOTI fleet and that, but we are focused on the infrastructure as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
If I may, 1 second. Denver voters approved the National Western Campus original funding in 2015. So,
Right, and several bond packages thereafter, 2018, 2021.
Yeah, the
4
one.
total bond packages to National Western.
I didn't know if you want me to respond to that or not. Thank you, Councilwoman, for the question. Obviously, I share your belief that we want to do a lot more in a lot of these areas. The total general fund allocation to DOTI is $135 million right now. The items you named were closer to $500 million in total costs. Obviously, the gap between what we need to do for any given department like DOTI, I do not either have a magic wand on revenue, which I wish that we did. So happy to talk separately when we get to the stock share conversation about the different revenue streams that are there, both from 2C as well as from the bond package about that financing. You're right that it went significantly over its initial allocation to the voters, and so there's a gap there to problem solve that we're happy to talk through. I don't think that gap is going to be enough to solve these problems or others, but happy to talk about that as a separate challenge distinct from there's definitely more we want to do in DOTI than we have the current budget for. I definitely agree with you on that.
Thanks.